All right, we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming on today's Provoke Coach podcast. I have with us a special guest. This is a gentleman that not only do I have a lot of professional respect for, but as a referral from a friend, I've been following and getting involved with your company, Mr. Zach Wigal from Gamers Outreach. Thank you so much for being on our show today.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
I appreciate it, Clinton. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to really kind of give people kind of a snapshot, kind of fill in of who you are, and then of course what your role is in your company. I know you have a large team that you guys all work together, that you guys have created something extremely special. Why don't you kind of give everybody kind of that, that blanket outlook so far of where we're at right now?
Sure. Well, first off, thanks for the kind words. Really appreciate it, and the support as well. It's awesome that our mutual friend Amir connected us. So shout out to him if he's watching right now. Well, I'm the founder of a nonprofit called Gamers Outreach, and we're focused on providing play and entertainment to kids in hospitals. And we do that through video games. We're trying to build a world where hospitalized kids have access to activities. And we're using games because we believe video games are unique in the sense that they help make play and recreation available at scale. So what's unique about hospitals, oftentimes you have kids that maybe they've had big surgeries, they're stuck in one place for a long period of time, and these rooms that they're receiving care sometimes turn into like apartments because they're there for, maybe multiple days and more rare cases, weeks and months. Now in these facilities, a lot of the technology you and I rely on in our day-to-day lives to like watch movies or play games on our mobile phones or on our Xboxes, the various services that make all those things possible don't always exist in hospital environments for various reasons. Maybe Wi-Fi is not available. Maybe kids don't, maybe there's like some sort of limitation on like what devices kids can bring in and out. So we're trying to provide services and tools that help kids be kids again. We have programs where we go into these hospitals, we make video games available, we make them easy to manage. And then we also provide various sort of coaching support to hospital staff so that they can have an easier time managing equipment once it's deployed. So anyway, long story, we are trying to build a world where kids have access to play. We support around 230 hospitals at the moment, currently in the US. We estimate somewhere between 2 to 2.5 million play sessions are made possible across all those facilities with the devices that we've deployed so far.
Wow, that is so fantastic. So just so everybody can get a kind of a visual, this is like a cart, and I think you guys call them what, GoKarts?
Yeah.
Where they ride in. Explain kind of what that is.
Yeah. So one of our programs is called Project GoKart, and we construct these portable video game kiosks for hospitals. Each device is it's like a mobile cart that has a monitor, a storage cubby for an Xbox or a PlayStation, and then the whole sort of apparatus is on wheels. Nurses can wheel this thing room to room so that kids have access to mobile video games in a safe and easy to manage way while they're undergoing treatment. So we started building this. We built the first device about 14 years ago, really in response to noticing our local children's hospital was having a difficult time providing kids with access to bedside activities.
Yeah.
So if you think about, deploying video games in a hospital, right? There are sort of various problems and challenges to solve to make video games easy to manage in these large scale environments. And one of those very simply is, how do we make hardware available in hospitals that displays video game content, right? Like monitors, the controllers, the consoles. And then once we, round up all these devices, how do we also make sure this stuff isn't going to get lost or stolen over time? And how do we also help the hospital staff easily, make these things available while they need to really be providing care to patients? So we built this mobile cart that houses all that stuff together. You don't need to know anything about video games. You don't really have to worry about the device. All you have to know is that you wheel this thing to a kid's bedside, plug it in, and everything works. So that's kind of the point of the go-karts. And
Yeah.
that's sort of been like the initiative we've become known for over the years.
So now is it specially made to where it's much easier to use, where it's just a plug and play? Because not all game consoles are like that, right? Everyone's a little bit different with how they do things. So you guys have kind of streamlined that in this cart.
Yeah. So we have a team, and we referenced our staff a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
So this all started as a passion project when I was in high school. Fast forward 14 years, now we've got a crew of full-time folks who work remotely around the country. And we actually have a couple people whose sole job it is to manage this program.
Okay.
There's a guy named George on our staff who actually updates consoles and preps them for hospitals. So when the hospital receive the devices, there's a bunch of family-friendly content on the consoles already. It gets inserted into the go-kart, and then the staff can, as you mentioned, plug it into the wall, and everything works. Now, I will note that one of the challenges in hospitals is managing these devices. As soon as you start getting like a lot of devices, it can be difficult for hospital staff to actively manage, many devices that might be deployed. So like 10 go-karts is one thing, but if you start installing like 100 or 200, suddenly, and this is just kind of the state of the world we live in. Each of those Xboxes has like an individual account with individual content, and each one might need updates. So we actually just announced a new program called Portal. It's on our website. If people check out gamersoutreach.org, we're actually building a software platform that helps hospitals manage video game content at scale. So if you have like a 500 bed facility, we can put like a computer in every room and allow the hospital to kind of manage content, kind of similar to like if you were to think about how Netflix looks, right? You've got this sort of user interface. There's like tiles for the movies and TV shows you might want to watch. Basically have like a very similar platform, except it's video games. And you can check out the demo on our website. We're really excited about it, but we're really trying to build services that, like I said earlier, kind of address these various problems that exist in the hospital that we see. And we want to really reinforce hospital staff. I think what we've recognized is, look, research and treatment are definitely the priority. Like if people end up in the hospital, goal number one is to get out of the hospital, right? That's the whole point.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Because of that, though, quality of life often takes a back seat. And so we're trying to help enrich the patient experience in these facilities, while also making sure we can make the lives easier of hospital staff who want to make sure people have access to, play and various entertainment. But, their first priority is like care. So that's what we think about when we try to approach these environments.
Well, and I'm sure that's, pretty challenging for your team to really kind of keep up with educating, the hospital staff and making sure that they can do. I mean, they have enough things to worry about, right? I mean, there's computers, there's apparatuses, there's machines that are going on all over, the hospitals, let alone another device that they now have to learn, because as sometimes the older that you get older than myself, and a lot of those people may not be as technical savvy when it comes to, these different games. I mean, I can't keep up with stuff a year ago. And like you were saying, you work in this industry and it's tough to keep up.
Yeah. I mean, I've been a lifelong gamer, man. And even now I'm like, it takes effort to keep your skills up, keep up with the news. And, even then, like, part of it isn't necessarily like a knowledge challenge. Although in some cases, you might have staff who they don't play video games, so they don't have a lot of familiarity with that, which is fine. Sometimes it's also just a bandwidth thing, right? Like if you're a nurse and you're responsible for, say, 10 patient rooms on your floor, you might be going room to room to room, and you're spending like increments of time with each patient. So if I say to you, you've got to spend 30 minutes setting up the Xbox console for this kid over here who's going to want to play it for maybe an hour before they're going to get interrupted, and then the next kid's going to want to play it, like it's just going to eat away the time in the day. So
got it.
That's a big piece of it as well, like trying to free the time of these healthcare workers.
Yeah, Absolutely. Well, and it sounds like you guys are being pretty proactive with this new system, that's going to be coming out, or that you guys are working on, because it sounds like it's just going to be just like Netflix, right? And where you can just, kind of, pick what you're going to do and play what games you want to play without a lot of interaction from the nurses. It's as easy as a remote. Like, I remember being in the hospital as a kid. They hand you the remote and a popsicle, and you're golden, right? Like, I remember, I remember going through that, and that's pretty powerful for normalcy, I guess. If you were to kind of take one thing that that you're getting, I guess, just from what we're talking about now, from these kids, what is the number one thing that you think that it gives them? Does it give them normalcy? Does it give them,
It's interesting that you use that word particularly, because that is the major vocabulary word of our work. Restoring a sense of joy and normalcy in this environment that is very, unfamiliar and highly stressful, right? Video games, I think, offer all sorts of avenues for relief in these environments. In some ways, they, first and foremost, I think, are a source of fun, right? A source of play, activity, adventure,
enjoyment.
And I think that at the core is like the main pillar of video games, right? Like, their purpose, I think, is first and foremost, hopefully, and fun. Beyond that, it's interesting because I think games also offer opportunities for kids to socialize beyond the walls of a hospital. I'll tell you the story. There was a patient that we were supporting at Children's Hospital Los Angeles who was waiting on a heart transplant. And this particular kid was in the hospital for 9 months. And during that period of time, the doctors didn't want him leaving his room because they were concerned if something were to happen to his heart, they were going to have to, try to keep him alive. So during that period of time, he's kind of stuck in this one spot. And I think most of us can, I have a hard enough time. I get antsy if I can't leave my apartment, for more than a couple of days, let alone being stuck in a room like that for that long. His mom was telling us, like, if it had been for Minecraft, or his mom, had mentioned this to the hospital staff, if it had been for Minecraft, and these are her words, my son would have gone insane, because at least he had access to this digital playground where he could interact with his friends outside the walls of this hospital. And so, I use that and the good news is, like, this kid got a new heart, everything's fine, he had a great surgery. I believe he's fully recovered last I heard. So in his case, like, games were a source of relief during this really trying period, when otherwise he was removed from everything. He was like 13 years old as well. Think how middle school is kind of a weird enough time for all of us, let alone you're going through this experience. So games were that connection to the outside world. And I think the irony there is, you think back to, like, you were mentioning when we first started talking about, like, the history of games and how much gaming has evolved over the years. Games used to be seen as this sort of like antisocial, like, basement dweller activity. And, I'll admit, like, I played a lot of video games in my parents' basement growing up, right? But I think the big thing that a lot of those folks who say those, advocate those sort of, perpetuate those sort of stereotypes, the big thing they're missing is, like, it's actually the opposite. Games are very pro-social. In fact, games are, like, at the forefront of this new concept of what it means to be, like, a digital citizen. And, we're interacting with each other. We're meeting people from other states, other countries. Just last night, over the weekend, I was playing PUBG with my younger brother who moved across the country. We were online for like 3 hours, and it's a source of activity for us, right? So, I could go on. I think games, I'll say this last point. I think games also are an opportunity to pass along values. Like, we work with kids that can't play traditional sports, right? And I know you can relate with this, being a fitness trainer. And we have this in common, right? Like, you and I both know Amir. I played sports growing up as well. So, I think one of the core things, the reason I say that is one of the, I think, core takeaways for me, having played sports and having gone to the gym and such, is that you walk out with this sense of values, these sense of values that transcend the sport and apply in various areas of your life, right? Perseverance, teamwork, a sense of community. Well, we're interacting with kids that don't have access to those experiences. And so the challenge for caretakers becomes, okay, well, how do I help these kids still learn all those values in a way that's relevant to them? So now suddenly in a hospital, if young Johnny gets upset because he loses a match of Fortnite, if he throws his headset, I as a caretaker could come in and say, hey, actually, Johnny, let's say good game. Let's pick up your headset and let's get ready for the next one, right? And suddenly it's an opportunity to teach sportsmanship. So I think in this environment, games offer kids that experience when they otherwise wouldn't have it. I would also make the point further that if that is true in hospitals, it's true in real life as well. And so there's this bigger conversation around parental engagement, what it means to be a healthy digital citizen, how do we manage screen time in our lives? I don't mean to get on a tangent, but I think those are key takeaways.
Well, and it's absolutely correct for a couple different reasons. Number one, I have my clients on a regular basis, to where a part of their hack, right, which I don't want to get into now, but is to be competitive and play a game a day. And it doesn't really matter what the game is. I mean, you could have a card game. You could have a little competition, throwing something around the house and playing a basket. You could have a gaming experience. My daughter's 11. She loves to play games. We were talking about this earlier, and something just clicked into my head that you said socially, that you're absolutely right. They're back and forth. I mean, I can hear her talking smack to people and they're talking right back. It's funny to me because these are 11-year-old girls, or 10-year-old kids, you know what I mean? Going back and forth, but you're absolutely right. And especially the world that we live in now, because remember, sports essentially got taken away for a minute, and that forced everybody online. And it forced everybody to work online, and it forced everybody to get behind the screen a little bit more. And I think you're absolutely right that, when it comes to games, especially, there's a part, and I'm sure that you know more about this being in the gaming industry, but I remember specifically getting sharp in games that required me to think about strategy, not just Mortal Kombat, pumping the buttons as fast as you can, kick, punch, kick, punch, kick, punch. These were games that you actually had to think things through. There were different stages, and it was really it was interesting to open up that passageway to my brain. And I remember being a kid going, wow, like my buddy is way better at this than me, but he was super intelligent. Like his strategy, he was able to think, 5 levels ahead of where he needed to be. And I know that we're probably talking about Zelda, back in the day for all I know, but I remember thinking like that. And do you find that, I guess, recovery or keeping the mental sharpness, is it increased with these kids in the hospital? It's gotta be.
Yeah. I mean, our general belief is happier kids heal faster. We just had we just announced 2 new board members. One of them is this guy named Dr. Juan Espinoza, who is a pediatrician and is a major advocate for integrating technology and gaming into healthcare environments. And he can speak to this actually much better than I can even. He has all the case studies around, hey, here's what happens in your brain, like while you're gaming. Here's how this helps with recovery. Here's how it helps with morale. Here's how it keeps your cognitive abilities sharp. Within moderation. Again, I don't know that, doing any sort of task the moment you wake up till the moment you go to sleep is necessarily healthy, right? Like rest is a certain, is very important in all of this. But you brought up a few different games. Funny enough, I actually got my start because of Mortal Kombat. When I was in high school, was sick over the summer and my junior year, and became really interested in competitive Mortal Kombat. And so I got to stick up for the fighting game community a little bit. Each of these games offers sort of like a different element of competition, right? Like the strategy games, there are maybe more different variables to think about while you're playing. StarCraft, there's a game called StarCraft that comes.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Long time, one of the biggest games, one of the most famous games in the community, in the industry, and also one of the most complicated to master. There's a lot happening in StarCraft, and not only is there a lot happening, but you play this game with a mouse and keyboard. You've got to know all the hotkeys with one hand, and you have to also control a bunch of little actions with your other and your mouse. And it takes a long time to get really good at the game. Mortal Kombat, also arguably, fighting games generally, I think, take a decent amount of practice as well. I would call fighting games, though, they're sort of like rock, paper, scissors, but really fast. You have to sort of know what to anticipate that another character, might be capable of. And you have to kind of react or, proactively move your character in a way that anticipates all those actions. So they're very different. I mean, I spent a whole summer basically solely playing Mortal Kombat Deception and busted into like the top 40 leaderboard out of probably 30,000 some players during that time. That was about as high. I don't think I even got past like the top 30, but I was sort of like hovering in between there. And I had a notebook, like I was writing down all the moves of the characters.
Nice.
So for me, it was very strategic. It was very, it forced me to sit down and problem solve and strategize and think about, okay, what are the things that I need to anticipate, right? And you start going through that exercise in one game, and then if you can take those same sort of analytical lessons and apply them to other things, you can start growing your inventory of approaches and problem solving skills. So that's where I think games, I think a lot of folks that are concerned with screen time and whatnot, they sort of miss that piece of it, right? Like when I play SimCity as an example, it's really difficult to get people interested in civic development, right? Like if you sit in like, I'm not even sure what class it would be taught in, right? But if you're in a college course and they're talking about city management, I mean, most folks, if you start talking about like, all right, guys, today we're going to talk about water supply management, it's obviously a really important topic though. How do you make people interested?
Right.
Well, SimCity, suddenly, you have to learn about, zoning laws are important because if my sewage plant is over here and my homes are all the way over here, people aren't going to be able to flush their toilets, so like that's suddenly it's a problem for the game. And that's what's so amazing about games. They are simulations. They're fun simulations that allow us to sort of have these mental exercises. And then the hope is that you become aware enough to take those exercises and apply them elsewhere.
Now, do you find that I guess, because we're speaking about it, if we fast forward in the future, because a lot of what you're talking about is anticipation, right? And where we're going, like you said, like 5 years ago, gaming, much different ball game than what it is now. But I think we can also talk about technology being the same. Like I kind of have this, and I don't know if you've ever heard, there's a real estate company that does everything online. I think it's Exit Realty or something like that. Okay. And somebody can, let me know if that's not what it is or not. But what they have, it's virtual. So everything they have is like, it's a video game. You log in online, you can go talk to people. You can go sit in on sales seminars. You can go do this. And I was coaching a group of realtors about this program, and it's really fantastic. But I was thinking to myself, wow, if our kids had something like this, how much more would they want to learn by playing this game? And it's interesting that you say that because of the different skills of strategy and anticipation that you gain. Do you think this is where we're going? Can you see that in the future?
Absolutely. In fact, I sit on the board for this group called Game Above, and it's essentially a handful of alumni from my college that I went to, Eastern Michigan University, and we've been trying to reimagine the education experience. We're supporting the university as it is, but we're also trying to think about what does college look like years from now. My personal opinion, and everyone has different opinions on this topic, for the record, I want to make it very clear that like I've kind of got my viewpoints. They might differ from the broader group in some ways. I personally feel games and the internet broadly offer immense opportunity in terms of reforming and really revolutionizing education as we know it. Yeah. For fields that require a hefty amount of credentialism, I think college serves a really strong purpose, right? If you're becoming a doctor, a lawyer, a pilot, these are fields that are heavily regulated for good reason. Going through the motions of credentialization are important for those fields especially. There are other skills, though, other topics of learning that arguably don't, in my opinion, have the industries aren't as credentialized, right? I mean, you might. Right. I'll say I was a marketing major. I don't feel like marketing from a college degree standpoint. There are definitely vocabulary words and frameworks of thinking and whatnot that are very beneficial. But at the same time, I mean, I'm sure this as an entrepreneur, you learn a lot more when you're hands-on doing it. And you make a lot of mistakes. Correct. I mean, if you were to rewind the clock of Gamers Outreach, I made a lot of mistakes in our early days. A lot of the lessons that have now propelled us to where we are thanks to those hands-on experiences. College did give me a framework, but arguably some of that knowledge, if it had been freely available online, and if someone had kind of made a step-by-step guide on like, okay, if you want to learn about the topic of marketing, here are the 10 things you should know that we think are important for it. Yeah. I could have on my own, as a motivated individual, just gone and got that material somewhere, potentially way less expensively than paying for the entirety of an academic campus. So I think games offer exactly what you just described. I'm reminded of, there was this, to call it a game almost, I feel like is an injustice, but there was and I think it might even still be around. There was a game called Second Life. And it was like The Sims, but all online. And you could create like a virtual avatar. You could build a house. You could when this game first came out, people were spending thousands of dollars to essentially own like in-game real estate and advertising because so many people were online playing this game. And it created scenarios exactly what you described. Hey, if you're a real estate company and you want to connect the world, suddenly here's a canvas to do that. If you're a company, and actually our team at Gamers Outreach, we've talked about this. We all work remotely. Even before the pandemic, we've been working remotely. Right. A lot of what we do doesn't require an office. It probably would be nice to have. I actually think we would probably progress faster. But honestly, I don't want to go into an office every day personally. I mean, part of the week. We've talked about building like a digital office space for our team that would at least give us like a visual sense of where people are, what are the various departments in the org. It's kind of hard to communicate that just through voice, right? Like you have to be very proactive in like understanding, what all exists. But with video games and simulation, you could sort of recreate this environment, at least give people like a visual reference for how things can function. Oh, absolutely. And I'm just scratching the surface. I mean, that I do think for sure. My big thing for gaming is I want to, and this informs a lot of our work at Gamers Outreach, I think the video game industry has actually developed a number of tools and tech that would be immensely beneficial in the public's, like in the general public sector in the world. I'll cut myself off just because I could go on more tangents about this, but I think my hope is to see these worlds that you would think are otherwise separate. I actually am hoping to see more sharing of resources as time goes on. And as the mainstream becomes more familiar and comfortable with video games, hopefully the video game industry is more proactive in taking taking a role in the developing world around us, outside of just the digital sphere and entertainment.
Well, and I think, speaking from, I guess, like in some cases, an uptight parent, right? Like you're always in fear of something that's different, right? Every generation, right? Decades go by and you were brought up different. My grandparents were brought up totally different than my parents, and my parents were brought up totally different than myself. And now, I'm passing this on to my daughter. Fear is a crazy thing. Why? Because we don't know. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that I see it coming together more and more now, and it's getting tighter and tighter. Especially now that we went virtual. I think that we've made in the last year probably a 5-year forward jump because we were forced to. That was the provoking moment that everybody had to go through. You know, and I think it's, you know, definitely going to connect. Let me ask you this, right? Because I mean, I'm a talker too, so we could probably be on this thing for like 5 hours, but talk to me about where did all this come from? Like where, you know, let's rewind a little bit. Let's go back to the beginning a little bit. I mean, where are you from? Did your parents instill this into you? Did you learn this yourself? Like, tell us about the beginning.
Yeah, you know, well, I grew up in the Midwest. Basically was raised in Michigan. My mom, she's very social and has a genuine interest and concern for other people. So any sense of empathy that I inherited probably came from her. Not to say my dad isn't also empathetic, but my dad is more engineering minded. He was a computer science major back when computer science was sort of just becoming a thing, and literally was an engineer. He, around the house, would always have computer tech. He worked at a company. It was one of the first software companies to make like CAD software. So like what Photoshop is to like artists, this company he worked at made software that helped engineers construct things. So he used to build race cars. At the company he worked at, just so happened that like there were a bunch of IndyCar teams that were using the software to build, you know, pieces of the car. And he sort of got assigned to you know, working with this collective group of people. So that's kind of what I grew up around. I was around this weird mix of social butterfly and my mom, my dad being an engineer, also us going to like the racetrack once in a while to like, you know, make sure the things that he was developing were helpful. And he was a gamer. I don't know that he would identify himself as a gamer per se, but he was playing video games actively. And my younger brother and I inherited that activity really from him. We were always involved in like, you know, normal extracurricular activities throughout school, right? Like played sports, grew up playing, you know, musical instruments, was in a band with some friends. For me, video games are the consistent hobby. And at a pretty young age, I don't, you know, it's hard for me to verbalize, but my attention was captured pretty young. I mean, to the extent that I remember getting like my first issue of this magazine called Nintendo Power. And it was like Nintendo put out this magazine basically where they shared news about things happening in gaming. And I would just pour over this magazine and couldn't wait for the day where I could like work and be a part of the video game industry in some way. And then as I got older, you know, I got sick over my junior year of summer. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, developed an interest in hosting video game tournaments. And one of the very first events I tried to produce actually got shut down by a police officer. So I was organizing a Halo 2 tournament at my high school. Long story short, I was trying to find some sort of t-shirt security, somebody who could come by and just help keep an eye on my event, because I had gone around to like local high schools. I was putting flyers in people's windshields. I had basically promoted this video game tournament I was trying to host. And we had a few hundred kids from rival high schools sign up to participate. And my mom was like, you know, you've got all these folks who are going to come out to your event. Maybe it'd be a good idea to like think about chaperones. It's like, oh, that is a good idea, Mom. You're right. Well, I call this police officer. Turns out he belongs to a media censorship organization that is not a fan of kids playing video games, and very much not fans of kids playing games like Halo. And he called up our school district superintendent, and I'm quoting his voicemail. He said, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's this kid, Zach. Him and his friends are trying to organize a Halo 2 tournament at your high school. I believe games like Halo are corrupting the minds of America's youth. Kids are training themselves to kill playing these violent video games, and I believe this event is a hazard to public safety. Don't think it's appropriate to happen in a high school. And he convinced our superintendent to like revoke a permit that our like community center had given me. So it's like a couple degrees separated from her role.
Wow.
And all these kids who had signed up, I mean, this happened like 2 or 3 days before our event was supposed to happen, mind you, right? So like as a young person, I'd already done all the work. I'd like spent a few months borrowing equipment from my friends in high school, driving around all my friends' houses, grabbing their tube TVs, grabbing Xbox consoles,
Oh,
running this
wow.
thing. I spent my own money. I had a minimum wage job. I think I was working at
Right.
GameStop or American Eagle at the time, right? And so I'd like saved up money to like print flyers. So I was really bummed because I was sitting in this our administrator's office, and I was frustrated because I had grown up hearing all these negative stereotypes around games in the gaming community, right? Exactly what I'm describing. Yeah. Anytime, this is back in 2007, anytime there was an incident of violence, it was only a matter of time before somebody got on the media and pointed to video games.
Oh,
and
wow.
As a lifelong, now it happens less, right? Because games are so prevalent, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I would argue, violence in humanity has been around. Look at the Romans. They built a freaking stadium to kill people in, so like it's
right.
The idea that like video games are making us better or worse is just like, to me, absurd. But all that to say, I grown up around these stereotypes. I had taken flack from coaches, right? Like I played sports, and coaches would sometimes make a snarky remark about how much I like video games. All my class presentations as a high schooler were about video games. Everything I wanted to do had to do with video games.
Wow.
So, I personally was like, look, I believe gamers are a lot more than these stereotypes. I believe we as a community can make a positive impact, actually, when we get together around what we're excited about. I had already done all this work to plan my first tournament. I thought, let's get everybody together for this new event. We'll run a tournament for charity. We'll donate the money to like a cause that sounds cool. And we'll at least be able to still do our video game tournament and show, actually, here's what gamers can do when we all get together. Yeah. Well, unbeknownst to me, that obviously became like a lifelong passion and in my career. I had no intention of working on Gamers Outreach full time when I started. In fact, I was sort of reluctant about Gamers Outreach ever becoming my full-time job, probably to the detriment of our progress, frankly, because when I first started, I hadn't been involved in a philanthropic cause. And I became aware my local hospital was having a hard time providing kids with activity. And I just looked, I was like, oh, well, as a gamer, we can solve this. Like, why don't you get the kids video games? Like, oh, you need help managing the video games. So let's build you a video game cart that you can use to manage the games. And it went from like helping my local hospital to a neighboring hospital, finding out what we had done. Now, these are the early years of Gamers Outreach. I was starting to get phone calls from like marketing agencies. And this is, again, like the early era of like esports, competitive video game tournaments. There weren't very many people around that were sort of organizing events like I was. There were some established groups, but like the collective esports industry was like way different than it is now. Right. So I would get these phone calls, and like somebody would call me and say, hey, Zach, we've got this client, Activision, small video game company. Maybe you've heard of them. They're a huge video game company, right? Like, people Call of Duty. We want to host a video game tournament around Call of Duty. Could you fly out to LA and help us? We'll pay you like contract gig. Come out and come join us. And I just started like amassing this work to where that sort of became like my first steps into the industry at large, like going to events, producing trade shows, getting hired by these various agencies. And while that was all happening, Gamers Outreach was a passion project in the background that eventually consistently was like interrupting my life to where I just take that leap and make it a full-time thing. And that was about 6 or 7 years ago now. So it's been my full-time job since 2014. Did I do that math right? Yeah, I think 6 or 7 years ago. And I've been working on it ever since. But I was very like, I never saw Gamers Outreach as being my full-time job. I always thought, hey, this is doing good for the community. It's doing good for other people. As long as it doesn't, and I enjoyed working on it sincerely. And my thought was like, look, as long as it doesn't interrupt, this pathway I'm on, it's fine. But I always found like intuitively, I always wanted to come back to working on Gamers Outreach. Like once I was done with this, school project or work project, my evening hours were thinking about Gamers Outreach, and I just couldn't shake it off. So here we are, 14 years later, working on it.
Wow. That's fantastic. So, what do you think it really was? You kept going back to it, and was it giving you more of a challenge? Was it more fulfilling than doing some of the other things that you were doing before?
I think for me, it kind of hits a lot of check boxes, and it's hard for me to summarize it. Something I'm very intentional about with people is like, I'm not trying to get on a pedestal and like be some sort of like evangelical charity leader, right? And like,
right,
that's not my shtick. I am a video game enthusiast first and foremost, and
right,
I recognize the value of play in my own life. I recognize the value and remember the value of play as a kid. And I can tell you now, look, I'm 31 years old. If I was in the hospital, actually, I'm not in the hospital and I want to play video games. If I was in the hospital, I would definitely want to play video games, right? So
right.
I think for me, and the reason I preface by saying that is like, I think there were a couple of moments where I didn't want to continue with Gamers Outreach. Like it was constantly interrupting my life. And I was like, is this really going anywhere? And it always came back to a few different thoughts. The first was, why am I really doing this? And what's the intent? And I always came back to like, the reason I need to be doing this is that it's making a difference in other people's lives. We have these environments in these hospitals where kids and families are basically stuck in these places, and there aren't really many groups that are trying to solve this problem. You sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, like the programs we have at Gamers Outreach, I mean, we're trying to solve the problem. Like we want to create a world where you walk into a hospital and the entertainment experience is kind of similar to like what you'd have on an airplane, right? Yep. Like you can have a plane nowadays, there's a screen in front of you, you can watch some movies, great. Hopefully you've got decent enough Wi-Fi to send some emails, right? Do some things. Yep. And hopefully in hospitals, the Wi-Fi is even better, right? Like it'd be great if you could game on the Wi-Fi, that's the goal. But you read a book, you take a nap, you listen to music, you play games, write some emails. What we're trying to do is essentially create these environments in the healthcare world. And so anyway, not to meander here with your question, but I think number one, first and foremost, as a gamer, I have that knowledge. As a gaming community, we have that knowledge to go into these environments and apply everything we've come to learn just by what we enjoy doing in a way that is immensely beneficial for these people that are stuck in these situations. So it almost feels like a responsibility. Like if you knew, oh my gosh, I can go into my local hospital and like help solve this challenge. It's really just a matter of like being aware the challenge exists in your own community and knowing that you can get involved. So that for me has been a big part of it, which kind of feeds into this more personal aspect of it. I am very driven by what I would define as purposeful work. I need to be working. Ultimately for me, I want to be solving what I would define as serious problems or challenges. I also want to do I want to work on the problems and challenges that are like that pertain to my interests, right? So it so happens like gaming is my interest. This seems to be like a challenge that's worth spending time tackling. So therefore, I'm going to dedicate my working life to solving, and really a lot of my personal life too, to solving this problem. And it feels very purposeful to me. So I think I sincerely, I approach it from that standpoint. First and foremost, like the kids and families we support have to be kind of priority number one. It's very important that intention, I think, is sincere. And then for me on a personal level, it's work that I enjoy doing. It feels it speaks to my passion and enthusiasm as a video game, someone who likes video games. It feels like meaningful work. So yeah, I'm a fan. That's kind of what keeps me.
I mean, it seems like it's aligned exactly with, like you said, your check boxes, right? I mean, you grew up from, a dad that's an engineer. He wanted to fix problems, right? And but then you have a mixture, of your mom in there that really is the face of the company. I mean, you can't just go fix a problem. I mean, you have to be that type of bubbly personality in order to get this thing working, because you're talking about going up against, two different types of people, the old, stick in the muds that don't understand, and the new, gaming technology that's out there, and this driving force. So it's pretty exciting to see that you fit in there perfectly. And you can tell by the growth of the company, right? Because you're right. One of the things that you said is that I think charitable groups and organizations, they do kind of get this this thought of, standing on your soapbox and look how much money and look what we did. And, it's all about this. You're right. I mean, it has to have something of background and interest with you. And it's one thing that you're going to have, and you probably know this, is that this isn't going away. It's only going to get more challenging as the years progress on. So this is something that, I mean, you could probably take it to the grave with your legacy, and you probably still wouldn't have everything figured out, right?
Yeah, I've definitely, I mean, you touched on a lot. I mean, first off, I try to make sure I am very upfront about, my intentions, because at the end of the day, like, look, I tell people I'm a human being. I like to go home, listen to Metallica. Nice. I'm, a single 31-year-old. I'm trying to date, figure out that in the world, right? So like, I make all sorts of mistakes, for the record. It just so happens that, and so I hesitate to, like, it's very easy for people to, like, oh wow, you've done these things, and like, let's put this person on a pedestal. And I'm like, look, like, let me be very clear about my humanity with everybody before, the media that surrounds our work can create this sort of image in people's minds. So I just try to be like, as like transparent as I possibly can about, look, I'm a video game enthusiast. These are what my interests are personally. And here's, I think, the value of the work that we're doing. And yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like the challenges and legacy and these sorts of things, one thing I've become comfortable with is this idea that relevance is never permanent. It's always something that is constantly being updated or worked on. Excuse me, I could spend the next 10 years building video game carts for hospitals, only for some new tech to come around and like totally make them irrelevant, right? And you have to I think everybody who creates products struggles with this at some point. I actually was chatting with somebody at a pretty large video game company about this topic. I asked the question, do you think it's possible to create a permanent solution? Like, do you think it's possible to create a product of permanence? I was trying to define, like, what would I think of as that sort of product, like a fork, a spoon, things that have like been relatively unchanged for a long time. And she was like, no, I think all of our work, we all build on the previous, what has come before, right? Like, there's this momentum that you want to be able to take advantage of. I mean, if you were to have to start if you had to start all your learning from scratch, everything we're doing right now, right? Imagine if you had to reinvent a webcam in order to have a phone call with somebody like this.
Right.
We wouldn't get anywhere. So you have to build on like the previous discoveries to make forward progress. Yeah. And that also means that inevitably, as more progress is made, some of the work that's been done will at some point kind of be put on the shelf, and it won't be as used anymore. So I think creators kind of have to be at peace with that. So for that standpoint, I don't think of Gamers Outreach from like a legacy standpoint. For me, it's really culturally, how do we shift the thinking and the priorities in these healthcare facilities to, and frankly, it's not that it's not a concern, right? It's just that installing video games, providing play is an expensive proposition. And most hospitals see gaming and recreation as like a discretionary spend as opposed to a clinical spend. And so this is not like a moral indictment of hospitals by any means, right? But from our standpoint, there is like a cultural message to champion that hopefully will be more broadly accepted, as you sort of pointed out, in the coming years. And then on top of that, there's the practical hardware, software, like what are the actual tools that will make games readily available. Right now, we have these various solutions we've proposed as Gamers Outreach. We're working on them actively. And like I mentioned, we've announced two new programs in addition to GoKarts and Player 2, which is a volunteer program. We also have Portal and SavePoint, so folks can check that out on our website if they're interested. And that's what we're working on. So, 20 years from now, will we have new things? It's in the last 5 years we've put out some new things, right? So, I think I don't know, and also the nature of video games and tech is like it changes so rapidly, right? I mean,
it really does.
Games are always being updated. There are new graphics cards coming out. Right now we're talking about quantum computers. Who knows what that'll bring about years from now. So there's all sorts of like crazy tech that like the general public has no idea is being worked on right now. How will that shift the landscape at some point? But I think you have to just come back to like, what are the values we're trying to be advocates for? Mm-hmm. And in our case, we're trying to build a world where every kid has access to play. Yeah. And we just believe that video gamers have the power to help. So I think that core message is really like the most important piece of what we're doing. And absolutely. I would translate that too, like as a parent, when you're engaging with your daughter, the world is ever changing, right? I think that, and I'm not a parent yet, so you might know this more than I do, but it seems to me that the most important thing is to kind of develop a sense of self-awareness and like a level of consciousness within your kids so that they have a sense of values and decision-making ability to navigate this world, because it's continuously different as we grow up.
Well, when she was a little bit younger, and she's 11 now, it was, the whole thing, and I think she might have been 7 or maybe 8 years old, cell phones were really starting to become popular with kids. Parents were giving their kids their cell phone, like, go play with it, quit bothering me, you know what I mean? Go do something and whatnot. And there was kind of a big stink around in my daughter's school with, well, what age do you allow your kids to have a cell phone? And, they weren't using a cell phone like what we did when we were kids. If we had cell phones or even the home phone, it was to call people and talk to them. Well, now they're FaceTiming, they're playing games together, right? They're getting on Discord, right? And they're doing it all now, But one of the things that my wife and we really, really wanted to instill in our daughters that we didn't want to, and I'm sure you remember this, parents that kept their kids from like drinking or doing anything, they got into the college world or they got into that environment and they had no self-control. They didn't know what it was like to have a drink or whatever. And it's kind of similar, like my daughter's friends are getting, crazy about silly stuff on the computer, where my daughter's like been there, done that, to where she's a little bit more advanced, than even some of her friends, that are, just now getting access to games and things of that nature. I think that, if we try to go against the grain with technology, I see a lot of parents like no games, no nothing, no this, no that. And that's going to take away. I mean, especially from having this, our conversation with you, I'm going, man, I need to do a better job. I need to be on these games and playing with my daughter and having that, daddy-daughter time, even on there.
Yeah. I mean, I'd advocate for that, really powerful. Yeah. Some very powerful moments for me when I was a kid was anytime my dad would want to play video games with my younger brother and I. And it was always just the most fun. And, it's interesting because, again, I'm not a parent yet, so it's hard for me to put my full weight behind this. But I can say growing up, my parents, for better or worse, there was no limit on screen time for us as kids. Now, the world was also a little different then, right? Like now there's this constant state of connectivity, whereas back then we had like 56K dial-up and like internet. Somebody had to make sure the phone was off the hook. So it was a little different in those times. But it was a non-issue in the household. And I think too, it's interesting you mentioned like drinking and things, because like my parents both, they never really, I don't drink alcohol a lot. I mean, I'm like I said, I'm in my 30s. I get flack. I actually get flack from friends because when I do drink, I always like the sugary beverages. That really
the flu drinks, right?
Yeah. And but my parents never had alcohol in the house, but it wasn't a thing. It was just we don't drink. That's it. It wasn't. Right. It never was even really talked about. And so I just don't even think about it. I don't drink coffee either. I don't drink coffee each morning. My parents didn't drink coffee. It just wasn't around. So I think there's something to be said about just the example. Yeah. It's kind of dangerous, but the example that is set simply by the lifestyle choices you have as a parent are going to they're going to transfer somehow some way into your kids. And because their kids are learning by the examples that are right in front of them. And it's interesting because I've as I've become an adult, I've had to, I really give my parents provided a loving household. I really owe them a lot. Yeah. But even as an adult, you have to kind of look back and all right, I'm going to edit this. Do I really want to, maybe not. So I think that's part of becoming an adult, is like figuring out, okay, like having the awareness to realize like everything my parents told me, it's now my responsibility to decide, do I want to keep that or not? And
right. Sure.
You know, anyway, that's totally off topic from video games, but I think it's valuable as a parent to be engaging with your kids in that way, playing games, taking interest in what they're doing. My parents never forced anything on my younger brother and I. It was always suggested. Like, oh, you seem like you'd be really good at track. Do you want to, like, you're faster, you're pretty fast on the football field. You should go, what's track? Oh, well, let me sign you up for this thing. And then, for better or worse, my mom, she was always actually both my mom and dad, they would always tell us we were great at whatever it was we were doing. Even if we really weren't. Like, there are times my mom said, you're so good at this thing. And now as an adult, I'm like, I'm actually not that good at it. I'm a very encouraging mom. So I think that's really like the key, right? It's like, whether it's true or not, giving your kids that sense of confidence to build and create and go into the world. And nowadays it's like, you can have a career playing video games. I mean, whether it's, whether games act as like a pathway to software development, or you become very creative and make content, or I mean, Roblox, it's interesting. I think Roblox and Minecraft, there are marketplaces. You can make items. I mean, kids could be retired before they even graduate high school if they play their cards right and sell things in a game. So there's all sorts of crazy things that exist now in the world that didn't when we were growing up.
Well, and I mean, look, and that's kind of what your company and what your team, that is essentially what you're providing, is that yes, you're providing this atmosphere for them to heal and for them to get out of the hospital. We don't want them in there all the time, but there are a lot of people that they spend a majority of their life in the hospital, or with some sort of disability to where they're not able to do other things. And I think you're given an opportunity that could be exactly what they need to further whatever career path that they go down, whether they're the creator of games. Why? Because they've played. Why? Because maybe they had to have chemo, 5 times that cancer showed its ugly face, as they were growing up. Like, there, I'm sure, are heartfelt stories that your company and your nonprofit have been able to provide and give back. That's going to continue to, I know you didn't talk about legacy, and I really wasn't talking about yours individually, but more so what you are really providing to the generations to come. Something to be definitely proud of, man. And it's definitely appreciated. So I hopefully that, I know you're pretty humble, and it sounds like your team is as well. But I do appreciate you being on. I could chat with you for the next couple of hours. Maybe we should get on some game work. I'll get some of my old rusty games out, but I do appreciate you being on today's call, man. It's been an awesome and a really awesome experience, and you're doing great things.
Well, hey, Clinton, I appreciate it, man. It's been great chatting with you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of these topics. And great, man. Yeah, and definitely let me know. I'm playing this game, Valheim, right now. Okay. Are you into building? Do you like building stuff?
I try to. I can.
It's kind of like, have you heard of Minecraft?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's like Minecraft, but a little more oriented maybe towards adults. Like, you're a Viking.
Oh, okay.
You chop down trees. You build, there's a lot of Norse mythology. It's kind of, it's cool. It's a very peaceful game, though. It's like mostly. I mean, it's build. You have to survive. You have to fight off wild animals and stuff. But
nice.
Yeah, we'll get you on, man.
My type of game, then. That's awesome.
We can make this happen.
Well, I'll have you stick around here for a second, after we end the broadcast. But ladies and gentlemen, look, obviously you've been able to see the tickler, where you can find Zach and his team, both on Instagram and on Facebook and online. Go check out the website. It's awesome. A lot of awesome videos, a lot of awesome stuff that you guys are doing over there. And, as always, again, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to share provoking stories of people that have pivoted, that have provoked positive change in the world, I want to talk to them. I want to have them on here, just like Zach. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much again for everybody that's listening. If you like it, share it and comment, and we'll definitely be sure to comment back.